Hey everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly lecture series. I want to thank our sponsor, Eric Osgood. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, you can contact Karen. Her information's on the screen now if you're watching on YouTube. The title of this lecture is pretty long. It's Common Strategies in Chess and When Not to Follow Them or When to Break Them. And I want to talk a lot about not only things that you're supposed to do in chess, but things you're not supposed to do, and when there's exceptions to those rules, which are quite common. And basically, if you have other information in the position about what's going on in the game, that should usually supersede any general principles you know that you're trying to follow, because the concrete nature of every position is always very important. And we can't talk about that when we give a chess lesson. We can't talk about every legal position in chess and what you should be doing. So we give you things that are true most of the time, or usually, and that means they're not true all of the time because of the nature of chess. If everything we said in chess was a truism, was always true, then everybody would be really good. They would memorize a set of rules, a set of ideas, a set of strategies, that everybody would play the same strength. But concrete factors are more important in general in most positions, so we have to take that into account when we take into account our general principles and when we should break them. And when I was told about the lecture, that this was the topic of the lecture, I immediately thought of this game. The other stuff I had to work on and figure out what would go good with the text. But this position, this game, I thought of right away, because there were several instances where people did things that aren't usually good strategy, and where people didn't do things which are typically bad strategy, but not bad in these situations. And this happened several times in the game. In this position, my opponent played the move e5. This is a game I played in 1992. And I thought about it right away when I knew the topic of the lecture, just because of a later position. Okay, in this position, white has the two bishops, which is good. And white has these doubled pawns, isolated pawn, which is not good. And typically, since white has an open f-file to use and white has two bishops, white would like to get some kind of attack, because if nothing happens and the game is sort of boring, then we'll see the weaknesses of these pawns being doubled and isolated. And the next move I made wouldn't be thought of by most people who follow the general principles of chess, which is develop your pieces and castle, which we already did, and activate your pieces, put them on good squares, get rid of pawn weaknesses, get space advantage, etc. So a move that's not very good, that may tempt a lot of people because they want to get a space advantage, is the move d5. And d5 gives away the c5 square to black, and it gets rid of what I call the center pawns that are next to each other. And I always find pawns that are next to each other to be better than pawns that aren't next to each other. And that's why even the move e5, which is blockading the center, which is a standard kind of move, also sort of breaks one of my principles of having the pawns next to each other so they control all these squares. But again, black wants to stop white from pushing in the center. This stops white from playing e5 later to open up the bishop, which we're going to talk about later because that's one of the key points of this position. So just to show you the reason why d5 isn't good, other than it gives away the c5 square, there is a concrete reason also, is that black can play knight c5, obviously attacking the queen and the bishop. And so the queen has to defend the bishop somehow. Now we can take the bishop. I'm not saying that's the best move, but it probably is. And that's actually breaking a rule that we have this knight on a beautiful outpost which can't be attacked by a pawn. Then we have this horrendous bishop which is blocked by all of these pawns, and the bishop can't really get active. And we're trading it off, which also breaks, for me, a positional rule, strategical rule. But again, it's concrete. It wins material. And in this position, you can see there's two ways for black to win this weak pawn on c4. Black can play bishop a6, or black can put one of the rooks on c8. And there's the pawn on c4 is indefensible. And then white's going to have a backward c pawn. White's e pawn is going to be weak once there's a queen or a rook on c4. White still has isolated a pawn, and white doesn't have any attack because white just traded pieces off and black's crashing through on the c file. So d5 would actually be quite bad, although in some positions that aren't this one, d5 would definitely be the right move. If black didn't have knight c5, if white could play b4 at some point, but since white can never play b4 and black does have knight c5, d5 is wrong in this position. And the move that I played won't occur to most of you because it sort of breaks the general principles of chess of moving forward, gaining space, having strong pieces, and stopping your opponent. This move is a reorganization of my pieces, and you're going to see a lot of that when you play chess in the middle game and end game, as opposed to the opening, the first 10 moves or so, we're trying to develop our pieces and get them active and get all of our pieces out. That's a general principle that we're going to talk about in the next examples where we break that rule also. So this whole lecture is about breaking rules and doing things that are against what you normally do because it meets the demands of the specific position. And as somebody who plays a lot of games, I play poker and blackjack, and I've played backgammon, I play bridge. And in a lot of these games, there's rules, like you should always do this, and you should do this, and you should do this. But then you have to know when to break the rules and when you don't follow those theories for certain positions, because what's happening in the specific position, the specific thing that you have, is more important than a general principle that you learned, I should say. And I think that's what you should get out of this lecture, is that general principles are good, but concrete analysis is more important. Figuring out what's going to happen in your specific position is more important than a rule that you learned 15 years ago that doesn't necessarily apply to your position. So in this position, I retreated, which is one of my rules, but not a standard rule. And the reason is I wanted to move my queen over to the king side and attack my opponent's king. I wanted to get my queen over here. And the only way to do that, since I can't go sideways, which I'd like to do, I'd like to play queen g4 here, is I played paradoxical queen d1. And the reason I even thought of such a move is because when I was a little kid, there was a game, there was a book written by Mikhail Tal on his match with Botvinnik. He played more than one match with Botvinnik. And in one of the games, he did a similar queen maneuver in a French defense. And I really like that the queen could go from one side of the board to the other side of the board by using the back rank. And Yasser Seirawan likes to call this a billiard shot. You're hitting it off the edge and you're going, although in billiards you could just hit the ball and it would go to g4. I have to take 2 turns because it's chess. And I have a billiard table right over there, so I can move my camera and show. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay, so queen d1 is the first move that sort of breaks the principle of, moving forward and getting a better position and playing in the center and activating your pieces, because I just moved my piece back to where it started, but I'm on a journey. It's a long journey, but the end of the journey is what you're going for. Okay, black played rook a to e8, putting the rook in the center. And now, again, general principles are fine, but concrete analysis is more important. Black is threatening the weak e4 pawn indirectly by threatening to play e takes d4, which they normally wouldn't play. So a lot of times when you're playing chess, you're like, well, my opponent's not going to play e takes d4 because I take back. That gets rid of my doubled pawns. I still have the big center, and my opponent doesn't have their nice e pawn. It went away. So a lot of times, concrete analysis will help you find moves that general principles won't, because in a general principle way, like in this position, I wouldn't even consider e takes d4. This just helps white tremendously. White still has the big center. White's c pawn is gone, and black's e pawn is gone. That all helps white. That's just great for white. And now this pawn on d6 is nice and weak. Okay, but after rook a e8, now there's a concrete reason why they want to take on d4, because they want to take on e4. Now, luckily, I didn't have to see that because my plan was to play queen g4 anyway, which happens to defend my pawn, sort of a happenstance. So I wanted to play queen g4 and start an attack against his king, and it happens to defend my pawn. So now e takes d4, I have enough defense of my e4 pawn. Now, my opponent did the same thing that I did a couple moves ago. I played queen d1, which moves my queen from an active square all the way back to the starting position. And my opponent did the same thing here. Again, for concrete reasons. My opponent didn't like my queen on g4, and he played the move bishop c8. And you're like, wait a minute, if I was black, I would be playing bishop c8 to b7. How could he go back to c8? What's wrong with him? Well, he's lining up with my queen, which means it's very dangerous for my queen to be on g4. And now if black had his druthers, he would play knight to c5, attacking my queen, take my bishop, and once again, bishop a6 would win my weak c-pawn. So black's already threatening to win material here. That's a concrete reason why he played bishop c8. He may have been intending to play bishop c8, realizing I wanted to play queen g4, and that's why he didn't leave his rook on a8. He played rook e8 first, so his rook wouldn't be trapped in the corner. Again, concrete analysis more important than general principles. Okay, so I played queen h5. I don't need to defend my e-pawn as much because his bishop is off of that. Now, since my queen was on a4 and I was defending my weak doubled pawn on c4, now I'm not doing that. So he played bishop a6, attacking my pawn. And again, with general principles, you're like, my pawn's attacked, I should defend that, and there's only one way to defend it. That makes life easy, and that's queen e2. Okay, but I didn't move my queen over to g4 and h5 to play queen e2. So I decided to sacrifice a pawn because it's a doubled pawn anyway. So that's a good pawn to sacrifice. And I'm trying to attack on the king's side. If my opponent plays bishop b7, bishop c8, bishop a6, bishop takes c4, it would make sense that my attack on the king's side might work because he's wasting time on the queen side with his bishop. Now, obviously, I'm not going to have much of a king side attack if I play queen e2. So I played rook f3, a rook lift. I want to double rooks. I want to play rook g3 and start attacking his king. That's the drunken rook. That's the sober rook. Okay, and he took a pawn. Now he's up a pawn. And I played rook g3 because I'm threatening queen takes h6. Of course, in this position, black wants to trade pieces because nobody wants to get checkmated. And one of the rules, again, we're breaking a lot of rules this class, is trade pieces when you're getting checkmated, then your opponent won't checkmate you because there's no pieces. And it would be good if black could play bishop takes d3, rook takes d3. That would make rook g3 look rather silly. Why did I play rook g3 and then I'm just taking back on d3? Terrible. Okay, but I'm not going to take back on d3. I'm going to use my rook on g3 and play what's called an intermezzo or Zwischenzug, an in-between move, queen takes h6. And the reason I can do that is pawn takes queen is illegal, it's pinned, and more importantly, I'm threatening queen takes g7 checkmate. And once black stops checkmate, let's say with g6, I can force a draw if I want, which I don't, by sacrificing my rook and then have perpetual check, which I'm not going to do. Or I could just recapture on d3, and now I've won my pawn back, and I'm ready to play rook h3 and bishop f6 and continue my mating attack. Okay, my opponent didn't like queen takes h6, but he wasn't sure what to do about it. So he broke one of my rules. It's not a general principle you'll learn from a lot of books, just one of my rules. He never played f6. When he played f6, I was very confused. I thought that was a strange move. And then about a year ago, I was looking at this game with our engines today. Now, this game was played in 1992 when engines weren't as good. And today's engines say f6 is the best move. So that shows you what I know. And that breaks the general principle of moving pawns in front of your king, especially when you're getting attacked. So basically, every move we make breaks a rule, but it has a concrete purpose. And the purpose of f6 is when I take the pawn on h6, which I did, he can now play rook f7. And, well, he could play rook e7 also, which he couldn't play either move before when his pawn was on f7, because rook e7 wouldn't defend g7, and I could take it, although I would play mate. But now he has rook f7, and he's given his pawn back, but he has a nice defense of his king. His rook and king are defending g7. His knight and his rook are defending f6, as well as his pawn a little bit. It's like half defending it. And now black has a concrete threat. And in this position, I made a move that actually follows general principles. I played bishop c2. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. General principles say when you're attacking, you shouldn't be retreating your pieces on the other side of the board. Okay, but the general principle I'm following, sometimes there's more than one general principle, there's more than one strategy, and they're at odds with each other, and you don't know what to do. And the general principle here is I don't want to trade pieces. Now, in this particular position, it turns out I'm helped by the fact of concrete analysis that my rook is overworked. My rook is doing two things. So if it was black's turn to move, black is actually winning. So I could do a Yasser Seirawan here and make a bad move on purpose, a3, just so I can show you. Then black would take the bishop on d3, and my rook isn't really defending my bishop, because if I take back, then I lose my queen. My rook on g3 was pinning his g-pawn. So the general principle of not trading leads me to bishop c2. The general principle of not retreating on the other side of the board when you're mating somebody, then bishop c2 doesn't make sense. So you gotta follow some rules. You gotta break other rules. And here, the concrete analysis says we can't allow bishop takes h5. Bishop takes d3. Okay, how did I get h5? Okay, well, I played queen h5 later, so I'm ahead of myself. Okay, so bishop to c2. Okay, and now my opponent made the losing move. I think they did. Yeah, okay. So in this position, if you were given a textbook on general principles and basic chess strategies, you would read, when your opponent's attacking on the flank, you should counterattack in the center. And this is just such a position where I'm attacking on the flank, and my opponent counterattacked in the center, and he's a strong Soviet grandmaster. We don't have Soviet grandmasters anymore. This was 1992. So he was born in the Soviet Union, a country that no longer exists. Okay, and I was playing Yuri Balashov, who came very highly placed in some Russian championships in the 70s. Okay, so he played d5. He's opening up the center because I'm attacking on the wing, and this is actually the losing move. And a book on general principles would say, yeah, that's a good move. Black plays in the center. White gets confused. White's like, am I mating you or am I defending my center? But in this particular instance, by taking on d5, I'm opening up the line for my bishop. So this instance of playing in the center is just wrong. And this was what I was thinking of when I was told, take general chess strategies and show when they're wrong. This is a really good example. d5 is wrong because when I take, I open up my bishop. Now in this position, my opponent saw that I could take on d5 and that I'm opening up my bishop for the attack. My queen and bishop make a battery. But he was ready for that. And he played the move e4. Now again, I made a move in this position which breaks general principle, but it's based on concrete analysis. Notice that he blocked my bishop. So I don't have any like queen h7 check or anything. And in this position, black wants to play bishop takes pawn, defending his pawn on e4. He has a passed pawn. And black has a much bigger threat. If you're watching live on Zoom, the first question I've asked you to answer out loud, can you guys tell me what black is threatening in this position? Black, if it was black to move, black would actually win immediately. Black has a big threat. You can unmute yourself and say the answer if you know the answer. If you don't know the answer, then it's tougher. I see people on YouTube that are watching now and they're yelling at their televisions. They're yelling at their computer. This is the move. But I can't hear you. That's why you have to pay to watch live.
Is it queen takes g3?
It is queen takes g3. The audience has spoken. Okay, and e4 has a concrete threat of queen takes g3, which gets rid of my rook pinning. So again, we can do another Yasser. We can play a bad move on purpose to show black's threat. Queen takes g3. I take back somehow, and then I lose my queen on h6, and black is up a rook. Okay, so what's funny is the general principle told my opponent to play d5, play in the center when you're getting attacked on the flank, and his concrete analysis told him this was good too, because he's threatening queen takes rook. But now I played a move where my queen isn't hanging anymore, so I don't care about queen takes rook, and I defend my pawn on d5. A 2-for-1. Queen h5, retreating the piece I'm attacking with. But it actually makes a lot of sense in this position. Okay, my opponent played queen c8, which I didn't understand at the time. I knew he was defending his rook, but if I play rook takes pawn and he takes with the rook, his rook would have been hanging, but he could take with the king. So I thought queen c8 was a bit too passive. Okay, and I played rook h3, lining my queen and rook up on the h-file, getting ready to checkmate him. And now he followed Bent Larsen's advice. Is that a general principle if Bent Larsen says it? Probably. Bent Larsen said, and I've heard this quoted today, so I guess it is a strategy because people still talk about it. And Bent Larsen said it 60 years ago. So if a super GM who's one of the top 5 or 10 players in the world has a strategy and people are referencing it 60 years later, maybe that's a good strategy. Bent Larsen said, you never get mated with a knight on f8. And my opponent played knight f8. And let's see, in 1992, was Bent Larsen alive? I think he was. So hopefully he never saw this game because this refuted his theory. Okay, and my opponent played knight f8. And this was the move of the game I was the most proud of. And I was proud to learn 20, 30, 35 years later. Wait, this game was played 32 years ago? I can't say 35 years later. But 20, 30 years later, when I looked at this with engines, this is actually the engine move. And I give all kudos and all of my thanks and all of my awards to Paul Morphy. Because without Morphy, I never would have thought of this move. And if Morphy said something and we're still talking about it, now there's a strategy that you can take to the bank, although you might get arrested. Okay, so Morphy said, when you're attacking, you want to use all of your pieces. And he said, some of your pieces may be unemployed. They're not doing anything. And I definitely have an unemployed piece in this position, my rook on A1. Rook on A1 has been sitting on A1 the whole game, waiting to get into the attack. And I played rook E1. That's the move I'm actually proudest of in the game. When I show the game to my students or well-wishers or people on the street who I'm shaking, look at this game. They're more impressed with a move I played later, but I like the move rook E1. Now I'm attacking his pawn on E4, and he doesn't have a really good way to defend it. But more importantly, I'm just getting my rook active, so I have all of my pieces in on the attack. And here my opponent blundered, played G6. And again, one of the rules is you shouldn't move pawns in front of your king. And when my opponent played F6 and broke that rule, the engine said, yay, that's correct. And now when he does it, the engine says, boo, what are you doing? So there's a lot of rules in chess that you follow most of the time, but they vary from position to position, which is actually the point of this lecture, to show you differences in positions where we follow the rules, the general principles, the generally accepted strategies, and sometimes we don't. Okay, and now the live audience, again, gets to have it over the YouTube audience, although the YouTube audience is larger, so I'll give them that. And the live audience can now suggest the move that I played, which ended up winning the game.
Queen H8.
Queen H8 is correct. And I played Queen H8 and my opponent resigned. Although general strategy is don't give your queen away. However, there's another strategy which says checkmate your opponent. That strategy is more important. And by the way, whenever I teach a beginning class of kids, which I haven't done in a long time, and I tell them all these different things, like play in the center, castling's good, get your knights and bishops out, don't make 800 pawn moves in a row, which doesn't stop them. They make 800 pawn moves in a row. I don't know what to do about that. I actually have a test I give them, which asks them what's more important. And I remember one of the test questions that was answered wrong about 85% of the time was, what's better, to take a rook or to castle? And people said castle. You should castle in chess. Castling's good. And I was like, well, what about taking a rook? And they're like, but castling. And so a lot of kids overestimate castling because all of their chess coaches are telling them to castle every game. And I'm like, wouldn't you want to take a queen instead? And they're like, maybe. Take a queen, castle, that's about the same. Okay, so in chess, taking the queen is the best thing you can do, except for one thing, and that's checkmate your opponent. And my opponent, I remember when I played rook e1, I got up from the board and I was walking around, and this was in 1992 when we played with analog clocks, and you could see the plunger up when it was your move. With digital clocks, I don't know what you do now. And I saw my plunger was up, it was my move, and I walked back to the board and I saw my opponent had played g6. And I was like, my opponent can't play g6. I knew that before I walked away from the board. And then I played queen h8 and he resigned. If he takes my queen, bishop takes f6 is double check. If you're not sure, I'll give you a chance to double check. Okay, now you're sure. Then he has to play king h8 or king g8, and then rook h8 is checkmate. So that was one of my favorite games because I sacrificed a queen to beat a Russian grandmaster in the last round and ended up tying for third or fourth, and I won some prize because of it. I think I got 7.5 out of 9. I might have got 7 out of 9. 7 out of 9 makes more sense. 7.5 is a lot of points. Okay, and g6 obviously a blunder, but when I looked at it with an engine, last few years, it says white is up like +5. So I'm winning anyway. And I'm winning because he made the fatal mistake earlier of playing the move d5. Then the engine says that white's winning, even though by general strategy, d5 is the right idea. And e4, black's threatening, queen takes, this pawn's weak, black has a passed pawn, they blocked my bishop. But none of that matters. It's the concrete analysis of the position that matters. And after queen h5, rook h3, my attack is going through. And instead of being down a pawn, remember when I sacrificed my pawn on c4 a few moves ago? Now I'm ahead a pawn because I took the h pawn and I took the d pawn. So not only am I attacking my opponent, I have extra material as well. And rook e1 got all my pieces into the attack, and my opponent plundered immediately. That's the game I was thinking of when I was thinking of breaking strategies to get good positions and when to follow correct strategy, when not to. Okay, other ones are examples that I've shown in chess classes and from my life that weren't necessarily happening in my game, although this one did. This happened when I was, I think, 14 years old in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Okay, this is black playing the Hungarian defense, bishop e7, not very common. d4 takes. Now, white breaks a rule. If we're going to follow general strategies, we're going to play knight takes d4, or maybe we'll castle. But white sacrifices a pawn with c3. And now this is a very funny position. Black plays a move that you would call standard, which is not a good move. And the move that looks totally against every strategy you've learned, that's the correct move. So it's the concrete analysis of the position which leads us to the right move, not just memorizing old tropes and hoping they apply to the position. The best move for black in this position, surprisingly, is knight a5. And if I was in a kid's class and the kid played knight a5, I'd say, no, what are you doing? And he would say, that's the best move, and here's why. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Okay, because by general principle, we hate when our kids do this, when they move their piece every time, move it to the side of the board. And I'm like, why'd you do that? And they're like, it attacks the bishop. But it turns out knight a5 is actually a good move because the bishop is very strong on this diagonal. And we can't keep the bishop on the diagonal. If we try to refute the move by taking on g7, hoping to win the rook, that doesn't work because black plays bishop f6. And black just won the bishop on c4. Black's just up a piece for nothing. So I think queen takes d4 is one of the main moves. And then we trade on c4. And this position's about equal. Okay, but my opponent played the normal move, d takes c3. That's actually a mistake. And if you think that's a mistake, wait till you see what happens soon. In this position, I broke a strategy of not moving your queen out in the opening because the position calls for you to move your queen out in the opening, which we're going to see in future games too. I played the move queen d5. So I sacrificed a pawn, not a generally accepted great strategy. Then I moved my queen really early, which every book tells you not to do. Then my opponent resigned. One of my rules, which I tell my students, is never resign. And well, I was 14 and I was playing an adult, so I'm not going to tell them my rules are because I didn't have rules then. Back then, my rule was, can my dad give me a ride to the chess tournament? That was the rule. And if the answer was yes, I'd go to the chess tournament. Luckily, my dad was a chess master, so the answer was almost always yes. Okay, in this position, black shouldn't resign. Black has to break some rules. Okay? And black resigned because I'm threatening mate. If you play d6, then bishop e6 is mate. He saw that. And the only other way to stop queen f7 mate is to play knight h6. And he saw that I would take, and he would take, and I would mate him. That's why he resigned. But actually, after I take on h6, knight h6 breaking the rule of moving your knight to the side of the board, now he breaks the rule of not recapturing, he just castles. And you're like, well, wait a minute. You took a knight on h6 and he castled, so you're up a piece. So his resigning was okay. He's down a piece for nothing. Not necessarily. In this position, black has two threats. Black's threatening to take on h6, and black's threatening the pawn on b2, which wins the rook on a1. And there's two ways for white to stop it. I talked to an engine today. I said, hey, engine. And then I had to turn my car off. I was talking to the wrong engine. I got to talk to the chess engine next time. My car engine wasn't help at all. It said nothing, although it was warm. Okay, and the engine said to me, you should play bishop takes g7, and the bishop defends your pawn on b2. So they take. Then you play knight takes, and it says white is ahead by 0.43. So white has a slight advantage. Materials equal. Black has the two bishops, but black's king is a little suspicious. Black's king isn't the safest. So, and white has all their pieces out. Black still has to figure out what to do with these pieces. So white's better, but white's not winning. Another way for white to play, which also breaks rules, is to retreat all the way to the beginning, setting up for the next game, which is bishop c1. And this looks like the refutation because we defended our pawn and we're still up a piece. But black breaks more rules by moving their knight again, knight to b4, attacking the queen and attacking knight c2 check, forking the king and rook. And now the only way to save your queen and stop knight c2 check is queen to d1. And then luckily, I guess it's lucky, black has c2, winning back their piece. So this doesn't give white any advantage. In fact, black's going to be a pawn up when this is over. So black's resignation was premature. Black taking on c3 was wrong. Should have moved his knight over to the side, which is against strategy. My queen d5 was the best move, even though you shouldn't move your queen in the opening. My opponent resigned, which you should never do, and instead he should move his knight over to the side. So the only thing my opponent did wrong this game was he didn't move his knight over to the side, and he didn't move his knight over to the side. I could write a general strategy book in chess. Always move your knight to the side. I wonder who'd buy it. I guess I'd buy it. Because black had to move the knights to the side and never did. Ended up losing the game as a consequence. Okay, that's a fun opening trap. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, and I think I'm black the next game. Let me double check. Yeah. Let me flip the board. Okay, this is the King's Gambit. King's Gambit is breaking some general principles of opening up your king, and it's not very popular nowadays, but in the 1800s, that's what everybody played. They played the King's Gambit. Okay, and now I like to play the move d5. And it's funny that I had thought of this for the lecture because last night on my chess stream, when I was streaming on Twitch from chess.com, I actually had this happen. My opponent captured, which is correct. e4 is the Falkbeer counter gambit, very well-known gambit. And I like to play the move c6. So the general principle, the basic strategy of developing your pieces in castle, yeah, we don't do that. We just move pawns every move. And in this position, I was playing a game in the last round of a tournament where I had 5 out of 5, and my opponent had 4.5 out of 5. And it was a 6-round tournament. And prizes were very good. I think first place was like $1,000. And I had black in this position, and my opponent made the losing move. It's the same losing move my opponent played last night on my stream in our 3-minute game. And what white should do is play the move knight c3, developing the knight. But I had a couple of games, one last night, where my opponent played f takes e5. This actually loses the game. It loses the game to a move you might not look at because it's against general strategy of chess. Strategy of chess says I should play pawn takes pawn or queen takes pawn and try to get some of my pawns back. Okay, probably pawn takes pawn. Shouldn't move your queen out early. However, by moving my queen out early, I'm winning the game immediately. And that move is queen h4 check. So in this game, I'm not castling, I'm not developing my minor pieces, and on move 4, I'm completely winning. So sometimes you got to break the general strategy and play the position on the board in front of you. Okay, he can play king e2 or g3. Both of my opponents played g3. I check, I took their rook, and I won the games. I won the game 20 years ago, and I won the game last night. Okay, king e2 is more fun. King e2 follows the basic strategy of not giving up your rook in the corner, although it does lose immediately. Now again, it looks like the basic strategy of bishop g4 check is good. That's not a good move because white plays knight f3. And then black doesn't have anything good to do here. What we're supposed to do is move our queen again. Queen e4 check. Move our queen every move. That's how you play good chess. King f2, the only legal move. Bishop c5 check. Now, white should play d4, takes, and then actually the engine plays queen takes d4 and blacks up a queen because the engine doesn't want to get checkmated. But I don't think a lot of humans would play queen takes bishop, losing their queen. King g3 gets mated, queen g6 check. If you play king f3, queen g4 is checkmate. So you play king h4. If you play king f4, then I have a very funny checkmate. Check. And now black has mate in 1, but it's not easy to see. You're like, how can mate? Because black has like 10 moves here that are check, but only one of them is mate. Can somebody from the live audience tell me the only mate in 1?
Bishop f2.
Very good, 3 for 3. Bishop f2 checkmate. Notice how black didn't castle or get any of their pieces out. Just the queen and bishop. White also didn't do any of that. Who are these guys, Potzers? King h4, bishop f2 check, g3, queen e4 check. Now this is very nice. After bishop f4, we just take it. Oh, snap. The g3 pawn is pinned. So remember, if you want to play excellent chess, just move your queen every move. Well, sometimes you got to break the rules and then checkmate. Queen h6 mate, and so forth. So in the games, my opponents decided not to get checkmated, although you can also play king g3 here instead of d4. And bishop f2 mate, the same mate. And again, if king f3, then queen g4 is mate. And all the mates are the same. If king h4, we check. And now we don't have bishop f4 because our pawn's not gone. We can't even stave off mate very long. And then checkmate. Maybe there's a mate in 1 here. I don't see a mate in 1. I see a lot of mates in 2. Okay. Well, obviously with white's king walking up the board. So that shows you an example of punishing your opponent by moving your queen every move. And it reminds me of something else. A lot of times I'm teaching kids that are beginners, and they like to move their queen out in the opening, and their queen takes everything. And I tell them that's not a good strategy, and they're like, whoa, I won 10 games in a row because I moved my queen out, and my queen took everything. I mean, who am I to argue? They play queen h5, which grandmasters wouldn't play. Their opponent plays g6, which is a blunder. Then they take everything. They take the whole king side. I see this all the time. And I'm like, white broke every rule in the book. White just moved the queen every move. And then white's like, yeah, and I'm up 5 pieces. And I'm like, oh. Okay, so sometimes you can break strategy, the generally accepted ones. And if your opponent doesn't play correctly, that strategy will work out for you. If your opponent plays correctly, the strategy won't work out. So you never get too good at chess. you get to a level where you beat certain people, but you never beat other people. And there's a lot of kids who play this way with white, and they beat other kids who aren't so good, but they never get to get ratings of like 1,500, 2,000, because this doesn't work against higher rated players. So you don't see these kind of games at the top level, but at the lower levels of chess, you see them all the time. You're telling white not to play this way, and white's like, why would I listen to you? I'm up 5 pieces. It's hard to get the kids to listen when they take all of their opponent's pieces and you tell them not to. I'm like, no, don't play queen h5. They're like, oh yeah, look what I did. And I'm like, all right, you're going to beat this guy the rest of your life, but you're never going to beat anybody who's really good, because that doesn't work out against them. Okay, let's see what the next one is. Okay. The next one is my opponent playing for a draw by trading everything, every move, and offering me draws. And the reason he did that was because if he got a draw, then he got his IM norm. He would become an IM. He was a FIDE master. He wanted to be international master. He needed a draw in the last round. And let me show you how playing that strategy doesn't necessarily work. And I remember, as soon as all the pieces were developed, he offered me a draw. In this position, white offered me a draw. If I take it, then he's on his way to becoming an IM. So I said no. Queen e7, I don't want to draw. And he made sure everything was traded every move. e4, which is not a good move. And he wanted to trade knights too. And he's basically giving himself weaknesses. d4 is weak, where my d5 square isn't weak. And he kept trading and trading and trading. He played knight e1 just to play bishop f3, just to trade more pieces. Kept trading. Then I traded, because that gives me an advantage of my queen's position and my knight's position. So you can see my queen and my knight are better than his queen and his knight. Now I'm attacking this pawn. Queen c5 check. He can't play queen f2 because I play knight h3 check, winning his queen. Now my queen and knight are very active and his are very inactive. The way to play for a draw isn't to trade all the pieces off. That's what a lot of people think the general strategy in chess is. If we trade everything, it'll be a draw. That's how you play for a loss, by having worse pieces than your opponent. And my queen and knight dominate his queen and knight. And I'll get to the end of the game where he blundered and I won. He was losing anyway. The engine already says I'm winning. But the end of the game was nice. And here he played the move king f1, which loses the game. King f1 by general strategy is a good move because his knight's not defended. So I'm going to play queen d2 or queen d1, and he's going to have to play king f1 probably. He just played king f1 first, but that loses the game immediately. Now I check, and he has to move his king. If he plays king f2, then I check, and this is checkmate. And if he plays king here, then I check and take his knight. So he played king g1. I check. He can't play knight g2 because this is checkmate. And if he plays king h1, I take his knight. And now the last time I'm going to ask a question of the audience, if he plays king f1, which he did, what winning move did I make and the game ended?
Queen takes f1.
Queen takes e1, close enough. That's what you meant.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, but you meant queen takes e1. Queen takes e1 check, he has to take, and knight d3 check wins his queen. And then I'd be up a piece. So he didn't get his IM norm. He played the whole game for a draw. He was trading, but he ended up getting a queen and knight that weren't very good against my dominating queen and knight. His king got exposed. My king was very safe, and he ended up losing the game. Remember, playing for a draw means you're playing for a loss. If you need to draw a game, you should play for a win, get a good position, have a position of strength, then your opponent will be begging you for a draw. Well, I hope that was interesting for you. That was an interesting lecture for me. It wasn't the usual like Semislav, Geller Gambit attack variation, subvariation. This was when general principles are broken, but they are for concrete analysis reasons, and why you can't always play what you were taught based on the position you have. It could be different. It could be the position you have, the general strategy is not one necessarily recommended in all positions, but it applies to your position in particular. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment if you're on YouTube. I want to thank our sponsor again, Eric Osgood, and I'll see you guys next time with more weekly lectures. Bye, everybody.